Hello, and welcome to FedNetTV's Veterans Affairs Policy Show. I'm your host, Bob Carey, retired Navy. Currently in the U.S. military, if you served 19 years as a combat serviceman, got wounded or injured, and then the military decided to medically retire you early, you're out of luck. Your retirement pension will be reduced by the amount of your VA disability pay. You don't get both. But you make it to 20 years before you get disabled, you're good to go. And you get both your military retirement and your full disability pay. Fortunately, there are members of Congress who are desperately trying to fix this and to possibly address this during the upcoming lame duck post-election session of Congress. The solution is called the Major Richard Starr Act, and we're going to explore how we got here, why the most bipartisanly popular bill in Congress has stalled thus far, and what needs to be done to ensure our veterans get the benefits they earned and rate on this episode of FedNet's Veterans Affairs Policy Show. The bureaucratic name for this issue is called concurrent receipt, like receiving two different types of payments concurrently. And the regulations stipulate if combat wounded veterans who served less than 20 years before they are medically retired, they have their military retirement pension reduced by the amount of their VA disability compensation. This currently leaves about 53,000 combat veterans who have not hit that magic 20-year mark without their full benefits. Now, Congress sees something wrong with this, and so the Major Richard Starr Act was born. Beginning his military career in 1988, Army Major Richard A. Starr developed cancer due to toxic exposure during his deployment in the Middle East. He was forced to medically retire prior to reaching the 20-year service mark, and so his retirement pension was reduced by the amount of his disability compensation. Inspired by this story, Florida Representative Gus Bilirakis introduced the bill H.R. 1282, eponymously named the Major Richard Starr Act. This act would provide combat veterans their full retirement pension and full disability benefits, which they are currently denied because they never reached that 20-year service mark. This bill was introduced back in 2020, has been reintroduced in both the House and the Senate in the 2021-22 Congress, and again in the current 2023-24 Congress, and has consistently been the most popular bill in each of those Congresses, garnering more co-sponsors than any other bill. But still, the bill continues to sit idle. And now senators are trying to get it added to the fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act.
Republicans rejected another Republican amendment to adopt the Major Richard Starr Act, which would fix a long-standing prohibition that prevents medically retired veterans from receiving their full earned benefits. That's a provision that has the support of over 300 members of this House.
Two full Congresses after its introduction, the Major Richard Starr Act has seen new life, as it currently sits as the most supported bill in Congress. The companion bill in the Senate, S. 344, introduced by Montana Senator John Tester, boasts a whopping 73 co-sponsors, while the House has recorded 326 co-sponsors and would have had more but for the House Armed Services Committee passing it out of committee and co-sponsorships not being allowed to be added after that. This level of bipartisan support is exceptionally rare from the first branch of government. But what is the modem Congress can use to finally pass this legislation and allow 53,000 combat retired veterans to collect both their military retirement and VA disability compensation without an offset? All eyes now are on the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA as it's called, where notable Senators Tester and Senator Crapo of Idaho are teaming up with Representatives Bilirakis and Scanlon to attach the Major Richard Starr Act as an amendment to this year's National Defense Authorization Act. Now that we've gotten a little background as to how we got here, it's time to talk to some industry experts who've been fighting this fight for some time. Stick around for that discussion right after these short messages. Welcome back to FedNetTV's Veterans Affairs Policy Show. The Major Richest Star Act is a crucial bit of legislation in protecting our veterans. But what do current regulations really say about how the military treats its members? Here to answer this and other questions is Levi Sater, Legislative Director for the Non-Commissioned Officers Association of the United States. Levi, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob, for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, we know that many of the organizations like yours and other military and veteran service organizations have been pushing this hard. What does this mean for your average military retiree that's affected by this? How does it impact them, in their daily lives?
At the end of the day, Bob, this is a matter of just a couple $100s for some of these families. But over time, this makes such a huge difference. That couple of $100 pays for the electricity bill. It pays for their cell phone bill. It pays for whatever type of bills that they need, a car, insurance, whatever type of money they need it for, they do need it. They're living paycheck to paycheck. These are our combat injured veterans that have made the largest sacrifice to this country outside of giving themselves their entire life. And we have shafted them to save pennies.
I think I saw that the Congressional Budget Office score on this was something like $7 billion over 10 years. And if you divide that by 53,000, that's essentially $13,000 per year per service member. To the average American, it might not seem like much, but when the average, the 100% retirement or the 100% disability benefit is $4,500 a month, that $13,000 really starts to add up, I would think.
Yeah, and some of these are men and women and spouses that were a sole income household. And now you have their spouse looking for a career to start something when they thought they would be home taking care of their kids and their families, not anticipating a career. So maybe they put off college for that point in time to support their spouse going to war for the United States. And it's our job, it's Congress's job to make sure that we take care of those men and women, because not only have we affected the livelihood of that veteran, but their entire family as well. And it's just unfair. The unsettling factor that we could dismiss those men and women that have given that ultimate sacrifice is crazy to me.
When you go to Capitol Hill and you talk to members of Congress and you see so many senators and members of Congress that have co-sponsored this bill, what do they tell you why it hasn't been passed yet?
It's really sad, but this is where DC politics comes in. And honestly, what we need is some honest politicians not to worry about re-election or votes, but to really do the right thing here. And that's what we're asking Congress, is to put aside whatever political agenda that party may have, and this goes on both sides of the aisle, and really come together and support and take care of our veterans that deserve it oh so much.
So why hasn't, what's the chances this is actually going to get done? And what's the chances it's going to get done I'd like to show a quick clip of Senator Crapo I think you were at this press conference with Senator Crapo and Senator Tester and Representative Bilirakis, where they were talking about getting this passed, and he talked about how it should be passed in this calendar year. So let's watch that clip real quick.
Justice is so obvious that every American who hears about it knows it's something that we need to do, and it's time to get the bill done. The Major Richard Starr Act must be included in the fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act or any other legislative vehicle as soon as possible. More than 50,000 veterans, including hundreds in Idaho and in every other state, could benefit from this change. I look forward to the enactment of this bill to honor the service of all veterans and Major Starr's enduring legacy.
So Do you think that's a possibility? You think you're going to be able to get it put onto the National Defense Authorization Act or some other legislative vehicle?
We would hope.
In Washington parlance?
We would hope, Bob, but as I think you stated at the beginning, this has been going on since 2020. And so honestly, who knows why it's really not going through? It's absolutely absurd that we have 75% of the House and 75% of the Senate signing on as co-sponsors to this bill, yet we get
they
called...
could pass a constitutional amendment with those numbers.
Yeah, they really could. You're 100% right. And the fact that we cannot have this bill passed and or placed into the NDAA is absolutely absurd when you have this much support. And it's really just based off of a couple members of Congress that decide to hold this up. And that goes on both sides of the aisle. So all we're doing is we're asking Congress to step up, quit playing DC politics with our veterans' lives and their families, and get this passed and take care of these men and women. This is not only going to show that Congress cares about the men and women that have served, but this is going to bring retention numbers up. This is going to bring recruitment numbers up, because we promised that we would take care of our men and women in service. If you sign that line, if you decide to enlist in our military, we're going to take care of you. You are a soldier for life. You are a Marine forever. You are a sailor for life. There is no reason that we shouldn't step up and give them the $13,000 that they are definitely deserving in.
I'll say that there's plenty of times, as you probably well know, that I'm not a sailor. But that's one of the advantages of being Navy, is that you can take your hat off every once in a while. So going back, National Non-Commissioned Officers Association of the United States is a unique organization that it represents only the traditionally enlisted personnel of the military. And you talked about recruiting. So, when you talk to your members and you talk to the non-commissioned officers in the military, does this impact their thoughts about whether they're going to stay in or whether they're going to tell someone else they should enlist?
With all the men and women that I am friends with here in the DMV area, my military friends, military families that I know, yes, 100%. It matters what it matters what the veterans also tell their sons and daughters. Do you really want your son and daughter enlisting or getting commissioned into the military when they're not being taken care of? If they lose a limb, if they suffer from a TBI, why not work at Starbucks? Where the worst thing is you get somebody yelling at you because you gave them wrong coffee. And you still get great benefits and health care and school paid for, and you can have time to travel and do school. So where's the patriotism? It's dying, and it's dying because we are not taking care of the men and women that we said we would take care of. And it's absolutely absurd. So when you sit down and you talk to these families, 83% of our men and women that enlisted last year were from a military family.
83%.
83%.
Wow.
And so now we have that 83% being reduced, that out of 83%, 56% now have actually enlisted out of those families.
Wow. I did not know that. That is remarkable. And it sounds like it's being driven by how they perceive being treated by Congress.
100%.
The U.S. military is relatively young. The average age in the military is about 28. And so a number of these, medically retired, less than 20-year service members, they're being forced to retire because of a disability relatively young. And to some extent, you wonder if our disability system is set up for someone of that age. Is this leading to a reverse age discrimination issue against military disability retirees?
I don't know if I'd wholeheartedly agree with that, but I think there's an argument that could be made in that capacity. I definitely do, especially with the fact that, to me, this is a no-brainer, and the fact that this was introduced in the table in 2020, and we are still dealing with it in 2024, where it looks like it's going to carry on to 2025 is absolutely absurd. So thinking there might be an age discrimination is a high possibility, but not my place to say.
Okay. So if you were to go on to one of the betting applications, one of the betting apps, would you bet that this is going to be signed into law in the White House by the president in this calendar year?
I would like to think it would be a 50-50 bet, Bob.
Well, it's a 50-50
bet. I have a little faith after the elections that politics will be put aside. And so after voting day, hopefully our men and women in the Senate and in the House can come together and really understand how badly this needs to be put through, and that it can go on our president's desk and get signed into law. So I'm somewhat of an optimistic person.
You are also vice president of one of the premier military and veteran organization coalitions called the Military Coalition. I think there's 35 or 36 members to it. What are you all going to do to try to get this done in this calendar year?
That's a great question. We have come up with quite a few plans. I do have to say that many thanks to some of our members, such as ROA and Wounded Warrior Project.
And ROA is Reserve Organization of America?
Yes, correct. And just those two organizations, and also our president, Jack Dutil, for really stepping up and making this a priority. And you have right now, as you stated, 35 active voting members of different VSOs that are all in support of this concurrent receipt issue. Our goal is really to address this after elections, where we feel that Congress is going to listen to us and take us a little more serious once they realize who wins, who doesn't win. Because right now it's a big factor on who's getting voted in and who's getting voted out. And sad to say, that's where DC politics comes into play, and we're really optimistic that once things are settled, regardless of a win or loss, men and women will step forward and really take care of our veterans. I believe they will do the right thing, and that's our goal, is to address those members that have been on the fence and haven't been necessarily a champion of this bill, supportive but not a champion of it. And I think we're going to get those men and women across the finish line with us after this election.
Quick plug, and then last question. What's your all's website that the viewers can learn more about this?
Thank you. www.NCOAUSA.org.
Last question. How does this even start? I mean, who thought, hey, let's take away some of their pay because they got too much of it as it is? How did this even start? Or was it more of a situation where new benefits got added on and the law wasn't changed in order to be able to make it adaptable?
You know, this happened back in the 2004 NDAA, and I think it was just an oversight. A simple oversight that was never made. I mean, I don't think anyone, not a single member of Congress, said, hey, look, where can we save a couple pennies? Let's do it on the backs of combat injured veterans. I don't think that was anyone's intention by any means. I think it was an oversight. And I understand we should abide by the rules, but I also understand that when accidents or when things are overlooked, they should be rectified, and that shouldn't be held to a certain rule. That should just be rectified and fixed. So, and I'm optimistic that our men and women in Congress will step up to the plate.
Let's, well, I appreciate your optimism. Again, Levi Sater, Vice President of Government Relations for the Non-Commissioned Officers Association of the United States. Stick around as we continue to talk about the Major Richard Starr Act with more expert analysis when we come back. Welcome back to FedNetTV's Veterans Affairs Policy Show. The Major Richard Starr Act is presented by its sponsors as a crucial bit of legislation in protecting our veterans' benefits. But what do current regulations really say about how the military treats its members? Now it's time to bring in someone well-versed in the needs and benefits for disabled military personnel, combat wounded, and medically retired Navy corpsmen Jose Ramos, who happens to be the Vice President, Government and Community Relations at America's largest veteran service organization, Wounded Warrior Project. Jose, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your organization's leadership in this issue.
Bob, thank you for having me today, and I appreciate you bringing this issue to the forefront and for the opportunity to talk about the impact it has if we and when we get this piece of legislation passed.
Well, along those lines, so we look at this. We talked earlier in the show about how this has more sponsors than any other bill. It's in its third Congress. What's the problem?
Yeah, Bob, you're asking the question I think all of us ask ourselves every day. You're 100% correct. I think more sponsors, more support for this bill than any other bill that we've worked on related to veteran policy in quite some time, right? 75 total sponsors on the Senate, 326, 27 if you count the sponsor on the House side. The holdup really is, frankly, what we hear is cost. Cost too much, and by the way, we can't do it now. We have to do it later. And if you do it now, maybe you'll ask us for more later. And I think at the end of the day, all we're saying is we're not asking for anything new. We're not asking for new benefits. We're asking for the governments to do what's right for those who were severely injured as a result of their combat-related injuries.
I think I saw a score from the Congressional Budget Office of something like $7 billion over 10 years, and that there's 53,000 retirees who are subject to this offset. So that comes out to about $13,000 per year per retiree. And for many Americans, they may think, $1,000 a month, not a big deal. But what's your experience been with the people that Wounded Warrior Project serves? What does $1,000 a month mean?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think financial security and financial stability is a huge aspect of just the well-being of warriors, particularly those who were disabled or injured as a result of their injury. $1,000 a month might sound like very little to some people, particularly when we talk about budgets and the billions and billions of dollars as it relates to defense spending. But it's a meaningful amount of money for an individual who is transitioning out of service after being severely injured, right? $1,000 a month in my case, for example, Bob, I got blown up in 2004, lost an arm in Iraq. $1,000 a month is the ability for me to be able to pay rent and continue to go to school. I was fortunate where I met somebody that helped me throughout my transition after being severely injured. But look, I still had to go on disability, unemployment, and working to get my VA compensation. And that $1,000 a month would have gone a long way to ensure that I had what I needed to continue to succeed in my transition out of military service after, by the way, a significant injury while in combat.
Oh, I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's really pretty rough. And I'm sorry you and 53,000 others have to go through that. I think it's important that we discuss something that Representative Bill Arrakis talked about on the House floor. So I want to show you a quick clip of that.
The Richard Starr Act has 335 co-sponsors in the House and 66 and growing in the United States Senate. Most veterans organizations, including the American Legion, the VFW, DAV, VVA, which is the Vietnam Veterans of America, AMVETS, Military Officers Association of America, Fleet Service Association, American Ex-Prisoners of War, and the Association of the Navy strongly support this bill.
So, of course, unfortunately, Representative Bill Arrakis forgot to name the most important organization in the veteran space, Wounded Warrior Project. But we know even supporting this a lot. No, so you have all these organizations. Yeah, I think that you guys are a member of the Military Coalition. 35 organizations in that. They've made it the most important piece of legislation for them. You have all these organizations. What are you guys doing in order to be able to try to get this passed?
Bob, I think you're asking a great question. Not only do we have all the organizations in the military coalition, but frankly, this is one of the #1 priorities for all military and veteran service organizations, particularly those who are spending a lot of time here in Washington, D.C. What are we doing to try to get this passed, right? Well, first and foremost, I think the easiest way to do this, frankly, is to include it in part of the National Defense Authorization Act. As you well know, there's still a manager's packet that's come out, but there's still an opportunity to influence and to really persuade both Senator Schumer, Senator McConnell, as well as the chair and ranking of the Armed Services Committee to do the right thing and to include this bill as part of that manager's package. We're also working diligently with constituents across the country to ensure that their members of Congress hear about this important issue and remind them that they made a promise to keep, or they took an oath to keep a promise, particularly to those who have served our nation's country, and encourage them to support the passage of the Richard Starr Act. And frankly, Bob, I'm not going to tell Congress how to do their job. What I am going to tell them is that we expect them to do their job, and that involves passing the Richard Starr Act this session.
As we used to say when I was in the Navy, not going to tell them how to suck eggs, but man, they better figure out how to do it pretty darn fast. I know that you and a number of other organizations had a press conference on this a couple of months ago, where you had a number of your Wounded Warrior Project members come in. What do they say about this? You know, put a human face on this and how they view this.
Yeah, you know, you're asking a really good question, and this is really about putting the human face on the issue. Right. As you indicated, we had a press conference here in Washington, D.C., led by Senator Tester. But joining us were wounded warriors. And I'm going to tell you, amongst the 8 or 9 individuals, there were probably about 5 missing arms and a handful of missing legs. And they wanted to share their story of how this piece of legislation not only impacts them as individuals, but frankly, it impacts those who are going to enlist and or join the military service into the future, right? Understanding that we're going to keep a promise and stand behind and support those individuals who have been severely injured as a result of their service, particularly those at the tip of the spear, is a promise that we can't break. So it was a good event for us to be able to remind and put faces to the actual message and to the bill. Faces to those 53,000 individuals that you rightly identified.
So, and just to make sure, you know, so people, some of the viewers might be able to see that. You probably have that on your website or your social media. What is your website?
So you can go to woundedwarriorproject.org. Easiest place to obviously go see that. I know that we've also had some social media campaigns specifically talking about and highlighting some of the stories of the Richard Starr Act. One of them being, for example, Army veteran Ryan Cools lost an arm and a leg in Iraq, a tanker. So he shares his story, and frankly, the message is clear. You know, sacrifice for my country. It's time for Congress to do the right thing and pass the Richard Starr Act.
So what are you thinking? What are the chances of this being signed into law this calendar year?
Bob, I think we're optimistic that Congress is going to do the right thing. You know, we just learned, as a matter of fact, yesterday that Senator Marshall from Kansas is now going to be supporting the bill or adding his name to the co-sponsor list once Congress is back in and they can add those names. So what we're seeing is that members are hearing the message at home from their constituents, their veteran constituency. We're hopeful that Senator Schumer, Senator McConnell, and ranking member and chairman of the Armed Services Committee continue to listen to those messages and include it in the NDAA. I'd love to say that I'm optimistic, but I also understand that, you know, we keep on hearing the same thing. And as you indicated, Bob, this is the 3rd year where we've gotten close. First year where we actually saw the Armed Services Committee on the House side move the bill through the House committee. So I think the time is now, and I think Congress needs to take that action and pass this bill this year. If they don't, we're not going to stop. This will maintain and continue to be the #1 priority for Wounded Warrior Project, as well as for really most of the organizations in this space.
we're filming this before Election Day, but on Tuesday, November 5th, there's, I don't know, something going on here in the country. And some people are talking about it. Once the election is over and once people understand who's going to be running the various chambers and who's going to be president, vice president, do you think this is, do you think this might change the dynamics of how this bill is considered, especially during the lame duck session?
Yeah, I think that once the election is over, there's no excuse to play politics. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I know that there have been some issues that the members have not voted on because they want to see how things play out. As you well know, once there is a change of Congress, as there is, or a change in administration, there's an opportunity for some members, particularly those not returning, to vote their conscience. And we're hopeful that regardless of how this plays out, there's less pressure, frankly, politically on individuals, and that they're willing to actually take up this issue, have an honest debate and discussion about it, and more importantly, vote with how they've demonstrated they want to vote, which is overwhelmingly in support of passage of the Richard Starr Act, right? 330 plus on the House, 70, now 6 in the Senate. I mean, I would tell you that that's more than a simple majority.
Yeah. No, as we were talking earlier in the show, we could pass a constitutional amendment with those numbers.
It's exactly right.
Unfortunately, Major Starr has passed away, and I know his widow, Tanya Starr, did a lot of work on this as well, and unfortunately, she's passed away in the interim as well. I'd like to show you a couple. She was also involved in that press conference in the Senate swamp a couple months ago. I'd like to show that clip as well.
I want to take a moment to recognize that we are stronger as a team. Please keep up your teamwork and take care of our combat injured. It was by far Richard's greatest goal was to pass this.
So you raised earlier the issue of recruiting. When I was 20 years old and I was looking at whether I was going to join or not, I just wanted to fly jets off of carriers. I wasn't thinking about what my post-service benefits would be like. But do you think that this has this issue is impacting either? We heard earlier that 83% of all new recruits are coming from military families. Do you think this might be impacting whether or not families are telling their children whether or not to join?
I would tell you that I don't know whether it's impacting, Bob, but why not take the issue off the table and not make it an issue at all, right? I think you're correct in the percentages. I don't know to be exact, but military service is growingly a family business. And I can tell you that families look at the way we care for those who served and how we treat them after they've served. And again, I don't know that there's a correlation, a one-to-one correlation, but again, as far as I can say, why make it an issue, right? Let's do the right thing. Let's pass this bill and make this a non-issue.
No, that's a great way to look at it, and I hadn't thought of it that way. Just take it off the table. Jose, you and your organization have done great work in leading this effort and pushing this effort and continuing to work on it. I don't know where this is all going to come down, and we want to provide our viewers, the facts on the issue, and not necessarily push it one way or the other. But it's inspiring to see you working so hard on something that is so important for your organization, and I appreciate that you guys are around. And so, Jose, thank you very much. Jose Ramos, Vice President of Government Community Relations for the Wounded Warrior Project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for having me.
That's all the time we have here. As Congress comes back from their campaigning in the coming weeks, the Major Richard Starr Act will be on the forefront of our legislators' agendas. Can Congress work together to pass the act and immediately extend protection to 53,000 veterans? Watch the FedNet channel for live coverage of all things U.S. Congress to stay up to date with the first branch of government. FedNet will continue to help the American people become more connected to their representative body. I'm Bob Carey, and thank you for watching this episode of FedNet TV's Veterans Affairs Policy Show. We'll see you next time.